In this episode of Discover Your Potential, I'm joined by one of my very best friends, Ali Gemette. Ali, you know I'm a big reader, and when you told me about the book we're going to talk about today, it wasn't just once, it was over multiple conversations. Like, you've got to read this book. I love this book, and add this to your list. And then so finally, I knew if you were raving about this book so much and how I should read it, I knew that I needed to. And we had a copy in the house. And so I just picked it up one night and I finished it the next night. So 24 hours, I jammed right through it. And so for our listeners, the book we're referring to and raving about is Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen. Joseph Nguyen is a writer who helps others realize who they truly are beyond their own thinking and conditioning to live an abundant life free from psychological and emotional suffering. And before we get into this book club discussion, Al, why don't you give our audience some background as to why this book matters so much to you? Why did you recommend this to me?
Say that around 2020, I gave birth to my first son. Prior to that, I had never struggled with any mental health ever. I've always been a very happy person. I've always been very in control of my thoughts. After having my child, it was during COVID, so you add that layer onto it. I started suffering with my mental health and went through postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. And from there, I really started this voyage of why am I feeling this way? Why is therapy not helping? I tried medication and medication wasn't really helping to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And the reason why I fell in love with this book is because it's so simple. I feel like this day and age, there's, go to therapy, try these supplements, exercise more, all of these external things to help yourself feel better. When in reality, we have complete control over how we feel, and that is through our thoughts. And I think that's why I fell in love with this book, is because it details in such a simple way how we have the power within ourselves to write our own narrative, create our own internal view of the world. And that's why I wanted to share it with Alexis, and I recommend it to all of my friends. I think, though some of it tends to be a little bit redundant, for the most part, it's so simple to read. Like Alexis said, she finished it in a day. I finished it in a day. I found myself highlighting so many things. There's so many takeaways, and I can confidently say that after reading this book a few times, I have adapted it into my life, and I have felt so much better.
Yeah, it's been it's an easy-ish read, and I like that you said it was redundant, because I personally needed the redundancy to really get the message clear, because even at the first pass of reading it, I had a different experience than when I read it again. And when I read it again, like you said, you're highlighting pages, you're underlining things. I did the same thing. I flipped back to it and I'm like, oh, I completely forgot that I had read that. What an amazing point. And I don't know, it sticks with you. And for such a book with deep context, I don't know why this isn't talked about more frequently. I know, like you said, the quick answer and remedy for mental health is throw pills at the problem, or I don't know. I feel like this book is really such a helpful tool. I'm so happy that you shared it with me in the first place. Because I've had certainly experiences, different experience reading it. And that kind of brings me to the first theme, Al. We had the time when I finished reading this, we talked about it. We had two different experiences reading this book. I remember sharing notes with you and I was like, what did you get out of it? And you were like, what'd you get out of it? And I was like, I thought about this, and this, and you had something completely different. Talk to me.
Yeah.
What are some of those themes? And we'll talk more in deep dive, but high level, what are some of those themes that really stuck out to you the first time you read it? And why did it leave such a positive impression on you?
I think, God, I could just go on and on about this, but I think some of the key takeaways is that our thoughts, number one, are define our reality. So everything we think defines how we feel about the world. And also the nature of thoughts versus thinking. Thoughts are self-arising. We have a million thoughts a day, whether you're conscious of them or not. But then on that other layer, you have thinking, which is what you attach to your thought. And thinking is a choice, and thinking is what dictates our feelings and our emotions. So, it's one of those things where if you have a thought about like what you're going to eat for breakfast, you think about it and you're like, okay, you move on and you don't think about it again until it's time to eat. But when you're having a negative emotion, we tend to sit and harp on that negative emotion, and we fill ourselves with so much self-doubt, so much
Yep.
toxicity. We define and we create all of these scenarios that don't even exist. And it's because we're not leaving our thoughts alone.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to have a thought and to realize that all thoughts are transient. They literally are designed to flow on their own. So if you have a negative thought, all you have to do
Yeah.
is just acknowledge that it's there, be okay that it's there, and you move on. And you will be so surprised with how quickly that thought flows on its own.
There was a part in the book that he talked about. It was like, if you can make a certain amount of money, like right off the bat, what would you say? Like, what number would be comfortable? And I immediately thought like 10 million sounds good, right? And then he says, what happens if you add another zero to that? And you get like 100 million. Well, I don't. And then immediately you start thinking about this. Well, how am I going to get there? I don't know if I could do that. I'd have to do. And it's like, gotcha. That's the
Yep.
problem. Your immediate reaction is, yes, okay, cool. I can do this number. Then you start dwelling on it a little bit more and you start having doubt. You start having anxiety. And it's just like, oh my gosh, that applies to everything.
It does. It does.
It's wild.
Yeah, it really does. It really is so wild. And I think something else that's really interesting too is when you develop this sense of awareness, like when you sit with yourself and maybe you're feeling really anxious. We all feel anxious. We're human beings. What I've been doing recently, ever since reading this book, is whenever I'm having anxious thoughts, whenever I'm feeling sad, it's like, oh, aha, I'm feeling my thinking. And just that acknowledgement alone is enough for me to accept it and move on. And it surprises me at how quickly I'm able to let it go. And then another thought flows. And it's in the book, the author references it as being in a state of flow. And you are your happiest when you're in a state of flow. And all that means is you are not getting hung up on any thoughts. You're not getting hung up on any negative emotions. You are just letting your life flow. And if you realize that the times in life that you are the happiest, it's when you're distracted, you're living your life, you're shopping, you're exercising, you're playing with your kids at the park, you're doing things that aren't requiring you to think about your negative thoughts. And that's because you are in a state of flow.
Yeah. The action piece to it. I'm going to get a little bit personal here because I had two different, it's funny, like you had one experience reading the book. I read it the first time. I had a different experience reading it. And I read it at a time where, candidly, I was my most motivated. I had a goal to be an online like personal development coach. I just went in and started crafting a curriculum. I started crafting notes. I started making videos and started sharing videos on TikTok, YouTube, And I'm just like this super amped individual. And I'm reading this book, taking it as, wow, this is such great advice that I want to apply it to my coaching. I want to share this advice with people. Like I got so many ideas for content that I'm sure you've seen because of this book. I added a lot of this content to my curriculum. And then I start this IVF journey and I start taking some meds as part of my egg retrieval, and my hormones are all jacked up. My super high climbing this mountain of feeling like I'm on top of the world. I have exactly what I want to do in my life, just pitfalls into a valley. And I feel this emptiness and this loneliness and this nothingness. And the first person I thought to talk to was you, because it just felt like, holy, like I didn't have the words for it. Just the lack of mental like blankness. I was tired and fatigued. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I just reached out to you and I was like, what? Do you know what this is? Like, is this what depression feels like? Is this what your postpartum felt like? And it was so comforting to hear from you. And I just remember you being like, oh, like, yes, like I know what you're experiencing. I know what you're going through. And it was just like a season of suffering that is just necessary. It was just kind of like, it is what it is. But I picked up this book a week ago to prep for this podcast, and rereading it, I was just like, whoa, this is a completely different experience than what I had the first time reading it. It's my mental state, but I really harped on that notion of negative emotions being tied to your thoughts. I had nothing but time to sit around and think because I was fatigued. I wasn't getting out there exercising. I wasn't reading. I wasn't making videos. I wasn't taking action of any sort. I was just laying there, just frustrated, doubting myself that I could ever get back to my place, that I could ever get off my ass and get things going again. And it just clicked. I reread the first page I opened back up was negative emotions are tied to how much you're thinking. And I said, all right, shit. Yeah. This is a whole other experience I'm having here. It's wild.
And I think that's the beauty of this book too, is like, I've got it right here on my desk and I always do. And whenever I'm not feeling good, it's so nice to pick it up and to have those little reminders. Like it's definitely one of those books that is a resource. So you don't just read it one time, like you continuously go back to it and find the things that you need to work on. And another big takeaway for me too, which I had no clue of this, is you don't have to believe everything you think. Like, I think as humans, we have all of these thoughts. And sometimes, especially like as a mom, there's this concept of intrusive thoughts, like something happening to your kids or like all of these what if scenarios.
Yours are crazy.
Yes, they are. We're not going to go into what some of those are, but just because you think it doesn't mean that it's true. And that was also a really big takeaway for me. Like, okay, like I am not my thoughts. I might have had a thought pop into my head, but I'm not going to attach any further thinking because that will just lead me to spiral.
Yeah, I think it goes back into something you mentioned earlier. I think you said something about transient thoughts. Like you are one thought away from an entirely different experience.
Yes.
Talk to me about that. Talk to me. Yeah. Give me some examples of how you've done that. Like talk to me about it.
Yes. I just find that concept is so liberating. Like we are truly one thought away from a whole new experience. Like think about when you are having a conversation with somebody and you're going back and forth and then that conversation ends and then you're on to the next thing. You're letting those thoughts flow and you're now onto a totally new experience. You were once just thinking about this and now you're thinking about that. And when you tie that into negative emotions, I always tell myself like, all right, as soon as I can get myself out of this negative spiral that I'm in, the quicker I am to a whole new experience. And it's so true. Like 1 minute I can be feeling one way. And then the other minute I sit with myself and realize like, oh, I'm really feeling my thinking right now. I'm going to let this go. I'm on to a whole new experience and my day has changed. But yeah, that's why some people, especially me back in the day, a lot of people suffer from morning anxiety. Like you wake up and it's just like this, oh my God, I have so much to do and yada, yada, yada. But then you get yourself going, you get into your groove, you have your breakfast and your day is totally fine. You go to the gym, you carry on with yourself and you're having a whole new experience in what you were having that morning.
Do you still have morning anxiety? Is there like anything that you've tried that just kind of helps snap you out of it quickly?
I don't really, I'm so happy to say this. I don't really struggle with anxiety nor depression so much anymore. And since having my first son, I had another one. And that postpartum experience has been vastly different. But I owe that to resources like this book. It also has a very beautiful way of making you feel not alone. Like it's very clear that a lot of people suffer with these things, so much so that books are being created about it. And so also knowing that like you have that community of people who are also going through similar experiences and then talking to people who have also read this book. My boss actually is a big fan of this book and she had the same takeaways as us. So yeah.
I think I've observed because I just never had anxiety. I remember you talking about it a lot. I remember our friends like talking about it here and there. I'm just like, I don't know what like everyone's drinking, but I don't have like this anxiety thing. I just, fortunately at that point, I have since changed, but at that point I couldn't really understand it. And like the breathing exercises and everything was just kind of like hoo-hoo ha for me. I don't know. It was just, it was so over my head. But I think what I love about this book is even if you have never felt any sense of anxiety or depression, like getting ahead of it and just reading it, just so you know, and you're proactive about it. Like I wish I had read a resource like this years ago before I had developed any feelings of anxiety or depression through this IVF process. But even further still, like I think I observed it in the last year or two. I have nighttime anxiety. So it's flipped for me. I will
Yep.
lay in bed and I'll just be, I'm tired. I also go to bed at like 8:39. So it's probably, I had to start
Me
by staying
too.
up later, but I just would lay in bed and just those intrusive thoughts. You're just like,
Yep.
what if somebody breaks in and comes in and stabs me? I would like wake up and like see shadows and be like, what am I looking at? And I
Yep.
just remember thinking, why am I feeling like this? Or how is my mind getting to this?
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to develop a nighttime routine to help me just like fall asleep faster and like
Mm-hmm.
journaling before bed, just letting out all of your thoughts. I found to be extremely helpful. I have a piece of pen and
Mm-hmm.
paper, and even if it's a running to-do list, which most of my mind is, it's don't forget to email my boss in the morning. Don't forget to Slack so-and-so to do this, laundry, like just running
Yep.
all this off because in bed, I'll just be doing that before I go to
Yep.
sleep and it's just
Yep.
chaotic. So like simple practices like that and having a resource like this book, like you said, to just get ahead of it as much as possible, I've just found to be, I don't know, just
Yes.
life-changing. It's wild.
100. Yes. And I keep looking down at my notes, but kind of
Yeah.
going off of what you were saying, the book also goes into how it's not about what happens to us, but rather it's our interpretation of
I
what
was going to go into
happens.
that next. Yeah.
Right. So the book uses the example of like there can be two people that are sitting in the same coffee shop. They're smelling the same smells, they're drinking the same coffee, but one of them is sitting there thinking about what a failure they
Mm,
are and why they didn't
yeah.
get this job and why do I feel
Yeah.
so sad? And the other person is thinking, oh, I've got a vacation to look forward to. Everything's going
Mm-hmm.
great. And the only difference there is one of those people is feeling their thinking and the other is living in a state of flow.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so true. I feel that all the
Yep.
time. And I make this observation with my family a lot of the times. Like when I'm surrounded by certain family members, it's just always very negative. It's like we're having two different vibes right now. Like I'm soaking up the sun. I'm not trying to think about this. But I mean, I've also caught
Yep.
myself like Phoebe, my wife will just, I mean, she balances me in a lot of that respect. Like she's
She
very just in
does.
the moment, very flow, very positive, and brings me down to earth because that's what I wanted to harp on. I wanted to harp on how we interpret our experiences. Like the
Yep.
coffee shop is a great idea. I think another great topic that's very common is when people are traveling. Like you can
Yep.
get so frazzled at an airport, your flight gets canceled. People will just handle things differently. And
Mm-hmm.
I I think this message is just so helpful to train your thinking. Again, transient thoughts. You are one thought away from a totally different experience. Like you may be interpreting this flight cancellation as the worst thing to ever happen to you, but you're one thought away from being like, okay, let's make a solution. What can I do next?
100%. And I
Have you,
think
yeah, go
the
on.
perfect example of that would be like you're at the airport and your flight is delayed. It's like, okay, that's the reality. Your flight is delayed.
Yeah.
Adding thinking onto that would be, oh my God, what if we get canceled? What if I have to change this appointment that I have tomorrow? Oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, I just hate flying in general. How long are we going to be stuck here? You start catastrophizing and you
Yeah.
start like adding your own potential narrative to what
Yeah.
could
So
happen.
selfish.
And
Yeah.
so this book is all about, okay, your flight's delayed. Your flight's delayed. You don't have
Yeah.
to think any further than that because you don't know
Yeah.
any further than that.
Yep. Yep. It's funny. We can people watch at airports all day long. I've seen it plenty of times. I've been on many flights that have been canceled. You see a guy going up, how the fuck you need to rebook me now? And he thinks it's all about him, super Mr.
Yep.
Important. And then you have other people who are just like, well, shit, like I guess I'll have to figure something else out.
Right. Right.
That's exactly it.
Exactly.
Um,
Thinking is a negative interpretation of our thoughts. That was another
mhm,
big thing in this book that I
yeah.
learned is,
Yeah.
you have your thought, but then my thinking is just the negative interpretation of that thought. And
Hmm.
so this book clearly demonstrates that you don't have to attach thinking to your thought. And I just find so much liberation in that. Because I am someone who gets hung up on my thoughts, very much so. I add my own narrative, I go through all of these
Yeah.
what ifs, like I exhaust myself through all of these different scenarios. And the more I
Yeah.
practice just letting things be and letting my thoughts flow, life has just seemed so much brighter and easier.
It takes so much practice.
But again, that's why this book is such a great resource to have, because
Yeah.
it does touch on so many different components. And the way that he writes it is just so healing. There's nothing that you have to like dissect. There's nothing where you're thinking like, what does he mean by this? He has such a beautiful
So
way.
straightforward.
It's so straightforward. It's so to the point, and he has such a beautiful way of being so relatable. Was that your experience too?
Ooh, that's relatable. That's a good one. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
I just think I love having this book on my desk, like you said. I like keeping it close by because it does take practice. It's one thing to read it and be like, yes, this makes total sense, but to keep applying that over and over and over, like genuinely, when I first read this book the first time, like, I just remember the weeks thereafter, like you came to visit, friends came, and I just remember just riding this high. I was so much more present. I was letting thoughts come and go. I wasn't harping on things. And that's one of the hardest things for me is I'm very much an introspective thinker or just person. Any event that happens, I could be driving and somebody cuts me off. I'm like, what the fuck did they cut? Like taking it personally, but really somebody's just trying to get on and go about their day. It's nothing personal to me. And just the practice of it, I think bringing awareness, it sounds so silly, but just why am I upset about this? Or why am I letting this bother me? Or just just acknowledging in the moment your emotions. You feel tense. Why do I feel this way? Okay, it's because I'm harping on some minuscule detail.
Yep. And you're the one defining that reality. Like there could be somebody behind you who also just got cut off and who also is having those same experiences, but they're not attaching any negative thoughts towards the situation. So it's so interesting to me how the power literally lies within ourselves. And sometimes there's this guy named Sydney Banks, and he's referred to a lot in this book. And Sydney Banks pretty much believes that like our consciousness, or that our reality is defined by like our mind, our consciousness, and our thoughts. So like all three of those things define. Yeah. And it's just so interesting how like the power behind those three things, like the fact that we literally create our own reality, is mind-blowing to me. Like that is a choice. That is a choice that we have. And I think that's so beautiful.
People have oftentimes they have a very hard time accepting the responsibility for their own life, right? I think if you look at this is one thing that I love teaching and reminding people all the time is you are in your circumstances because of you. Like, again, there are things you can't control. You can't control who you were born to. You can't control your parents, where you were born, details like that. But at some point, you've got to put on your big adult pants and take responsibility for your life. And people can just get so caught up in like that egotistical, selfish thinking, and you'll just keep spinning it and spinning it, and it's harder to pull yourself out at that point. The more you keep creating this self-centered narrative, the more that you allow things to happen to you versus like just letting it go. It happened, whatever. It's just like all these victim cards. It's just, come on, like I love this book. It just brings such good awareness to getting out of your own way, because life is up to you. You are responsible for it. And your attitude really will just shape how life turns out. Like I love the quote, your frequency is what you frequently see. I say that all the time, but that's one of my favorites.
And I love that. Yeah. Yes, it's not external factors that decide our happiness. It's everything inside of us that decides our happiness and how we feel about the world and how we feel about ourselves. And it's all about the way we talk. Like what is our internal dialogue? We've all been guilty of speaking really unkindly to ourselves. And that's because, yet again, we're putting too much thinking towards our thought. And it's really interesting how I actually want to read one of these quotes from the book.
Yeah.
What can give us true peace is knowing that we always have this state of pure peace, love, and fulfillment underneath any thinking that we may ever have at any given moment. And he talks a lot about how humans are literally designed to return to balance. So
Mm.
if you're having a panic attack, if you're going through depression, like our nervous system was literally designed to return to a baseline level. And
Yeah.
sometimes I have to remind myself of that too, because I know I probably speak for a lot of people who worry, like, am I stuck feeling this way forever? Like,
Yeah.
what if I
Yeah.
never feel like myself again? That's
Mm-hmm.
negative thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really beautiful to remember that we as human beings are always designed to return to balance.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
me specifically, and the things that I've gone through, that's such a beautiful takeaway for me.
You mentioned this. You mentioned this earlier, the flow state. So, I mean, we talk about we're making a lot of observations. We're stating like a problem, right? The problem solver in me is like, okay, how can I personally use this to my advantage to therefore change in the future? And so same thing for the audience. Like I want to help people change for the future. And so you kind of have to rework it. Like, okay, for me going through this egg retrieval process, I made the observation of I had all these negative emotions. I correlated that to the amount of time I had to think. And so, what's my solution? Well, my solution is I need to be more present. Okay, how do I be more present? I need to get up and like do some activities, whether it's a little bit of self care, taking a bath, going for a walk. Like you said, when you talked about flow state, I read this in pretty much any self improvement or self productivity book that I picked up has mentioned flow state.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just such an amazing way to get yourself into the present moment. That is what's going to help you stop thinking so much. A
Mm-hmm.
great example I read in another book was like race car drivers. They're going 200 miles per hour navigating turns. They don't have time to like think about what they're having for dinner. They're just trying to survive like the next turn.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
if you have an outlet that you can allow yourself to do something like that, like playing pickleball or tennis or hanging out with your family, like the more present you allow yourself to be, the more you do, the
Yep.
less you think. And that was kind of my remedy.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. You could be having the worst day. You could be feeling so down. And then let's just say you pick up the phone and call a friend and you just start chatting. And the book refers to it as like, get out of your head and into your life. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
get into
Mm-hmm.
your life. And the
Yeah.
more you get into your life, the less you are in your head and the easier it is to stay in a state of flow.
Yeah.
And what's really difficult for me is being present because I think
Yeah.
naturally we're designed to think about the past, worry about the future. It's
Yeah.
so funny that we worry about those things because we can't control those things. Like the only thing we can control is the present. And yet it's so hard for so many people to stay present. And I
Yeah.
think that's where this concept of like getting into your life really helps that.
Yeah. Minimizing, adding to that, like just minimizing distractions that we have. I made the
Mhm.
correlation that during this time too, as process of egg retrieval, I had never spent more time on my phone, more screen time,
Mhm.
endlessly
Mhm.
just consuming. It's same kind of principle that you just said. My little coaching spin on it is stop consuming and start creating. Like get into your life and design it, whether
Yes.
it's a hobby, whether it's a passion, like just doing something that's going to take your mind from the Instagram reels that you were just scrolling on and the recipe that you saw or the terrorist attack that's going on the other side of the world and just like put everything down for a minute and find an activity that's going to engage you. You've
That's
got
right.
to find a solution that's unique for you to help you
Absolutely.
find your flow at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And this book also talks about how doing those things can be so hard for some people.
Yeah.
Like I know some of the reviews on this book are like, I know I shouldn't be thinking so much, but how do I do that? And the answer to that is there's nothing for you to do. Once you become aware that you're feeling your thinking, then it's just like, oh, okay, I'm feeling my thinking too much. And you
Yeah.
just acknowledge that. And then you just move on with your day. You don't try to like
Mm-hmm.
fight the feeling because the more you try to fight how you feel, I think the more it kind of like lives inside of
You still
you.
think about it. Yeah.
Yes. So like there's this level of acceptance. Like, okay, I feel this way right now. I'm feeling my thinking. I'm gonna keep like what would non-anxious Allie do in this moment? I'll keep working. I'll call a friend. I'll start cleaning. I'll do something that I know brings me joy. So it's, I don't want to say a distraction, because a lot of people will argue like, no, you should feel how
Yeah.
you feel. But to a
Yeah.
certain extent, yes. But also, like, there also has to be this understanding of, the more you sit and like sit with your thoughts, the more you're just going to start spiraling.
Yeah. Distractions aren't distractions in a positive way. Like, don't get on your phone and start scrolling through some stuff. Listen to you, be uniquely you. And that goes
Yes.
into the last theme that when I first read this book, I harped on this chapter for so long. It's about creating goals out of inspiration versus desperation. This
Oh yeah,
was this
this
was
was a
yeah,
big
this was the
takeaway for
thing for me.
you.
I was like, oh shit, like here we go. Joseph talks about there are two types of goals you can create. Individuals have goals created out of inspiration, or they have goals created out of desperation. So for the
Yep.
audience, for example, you're in a job that you hate. You are getting treated terribly by your boss. You just want to get out of it. And so you make a goal for yourself to just start applying for jobs aimlessly. Like, I'm sure people can relate to this. I think we've all been there where we've hated a job and you go on LinkedIn and you just apply as many as you can, just like mass apply. The problem with that is you are running away from a situation. You almost will jump at the first opportunity that arises for you, regardless if it's good for you or not, just because you're so desperate to get out of this other situation. And so while that will bring you temporary relief of like, yes, I'm out of this job. Okay, I'm into something new. I know plenty of people, myself included, who have gone 6-8 months down the line in that new gig, and you're like, fudge, like it's still, this is
You're
lingering
still not
again. Like, I'm still
happy.
not
Yep.
happy. Like, what's going on? I had a new job. I thought this would solve it. And the solution is to create goals out of inspiration. This is my jam. I love coaching about this. Creating goals out of inspiration are, maybe you like to write. Maybe you spent some time in college and throughout college, like blogging and writing stuff. And that's just like kind of always been your thing. You would always go back to that. And you're thoughtful about it. And so like maybe you have an inspired goal of, okay, I need to finish a book that I started in college. Like that's an inspired goal. You love writing. That's what you love to do. That's your inner message, regardless if your experience right now is relevant or not. That is something that inspires you. I love this section so much. I can keep talking on and on about it, but just the authenticity of doing things that are meaningful to you will therefore provide you that flow state that will therefore help stop thinking so doubtful and anxious. It's just a positive direction. Not to say you won't have ups and downs, but man, I love that part.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the key word there is like authenticity, right? Like doing something, pursuing something that is authentic to you, not doing it because you're trying to impress somebody, not doing it for a certain status, not doing it because you're desperate for a new situation, but really taking the time to figure out what is meaningful for you. And you don't have to necessarily worry about the end goal. I think the first step is just doing that thing and allowing yourself grace throughout the period.
Yeah, good added point as to not thinking about the end goal. I think that's the hardest part about creating goals goals in general, but especially ones that are inspired, because you don't know what you don't know. Like publishing a book, for example, for me, with a background in mathematics and analytics, I don't know what that process looks like. It's very scary, but I should not think about the end state of seeing this book published, because I'm dwelling on it. Then I'll start doubting whether it can actually happen. I'll start thinking too much into it. Just think about your next step. Yeah, I love that you added that in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny too, because when we were talking about what really stood out to me, what really stood out to you, that was one of the things that was more something that you resonated with and not so much for me. But listening to you talk about that now, I'm like, oh, like, yeah, that is like, that's so important. We only get to live one life, and I feel like we spend so much time doing things, because we feel like we have to. Like,
Mm.
You have to go and graduate college and get that
Yeah.
job. Well, some of us don't even know what we want to do when we graduate college, you know, and we're doing
Most.
things to please other people, and
Yeah.
we're doing things to look a certain way. And nobody is happy. Nobody is in a state of flow when they're doing those things. And
Yeah.
so, like, really sitting with yourself, and you and I talk about introspection all the time, but like having the introspection to like look within yourself to really figure out what makes you happy, and then just
Yeah.
creating an action plan. Don't
Yep.
go through all of these what if
Yep.
scenarios. Don't think about what if I fail? What if I can't get the funding for this? Like, what are people going to think? It doesn't matter. We live one life. We all die. You know, that's
Yeah.
just the reality of every single
Yeah.
person on this planet. And so, why wouldn't we all take the time to pursue something that feels purposeful and that feels
Yeah.
authentic to who we are?
Yeah. And I think they struggle with finding that authenticity and like I think everyone has this question, me included. It changes every couple of months. Like, what is my purpose? What does give me meaning? You're not going to get that from aggressively thinking very hard. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of, you brought up those 3 tiers: consciousness, thought,
In
there was one
mind.
more in my, yeah. And so it lives at a level that's not thinking. Like, thinking
Right.
is not the level that you're going to find that inspiration. It's really when you're taking a couple of steps into your consciousness. So like
Right.
something is living within there that you
Right.
haven't explored yet. You just had to light a fire in
Yep.
there.
Absolutely. And to expand on those, they're actually called the three principles by Sydney
Okay.
Banks. And the
Yeah.
first one is mind, and that is like the wisdom is an innate intelligence that everyone possesses deep within. And then the
Yes.
consciousness is the awareness of the gift of perception.
Okay.
And then the
Yeah.
thoughts are like the tools and like the craftsmanship of how we
Okay.
interpret the world. And so
Okay.
all three of those things combined define our reality. And I go back to it all the time that the core, the core reasoning of suffering is our thoughts. Like when you can fully understand that, it is so empowering and so beautiful. Like
Yeah.
nothing outside of us is making us unhappy or sad. It is our interpretation of what is
Yeah.
happening to us that is
Yeah.
making us happy or sad. And as humans, we literally have a choice to feel a certain way about certain things. And so I do think it comes with practice, and it takes a lot of like reframing of your thought process, but eventually you get
Mm-hmm.
into this loop of not giving your negative thoughts attention, giving
Yep.
your positive thoughts attention, you know, and
Yep.
and just letting that flow from there.
It's funny. I mean, all these themes correlate with each other. They all kind of tie in together. Like the 3 principles and that flow state. Like, have you ever sat in the shower and just like had an idea? That's how it operates. That's how like the
Mhm.
good stuff comes out. It doesn't come out when you're stressed and anxious and you're desperate to find a solution to your problem. It's going to
Yes.
come when all of that just kind of dissipates and
Yep.
you're able to just be, and your consciousness is just like at its peace, right?
100%. You cannot find clarity with a busy head.
Yeah.
Clarity comes when you are at peace
Yeah.
and when you're content and when you're happy. And I keep saying this, but like that is within you. Like it is within you to feel all of those things. And we, no matter what the circumstance, are always designed to return to balance if we allow ourselves to do that. And allowing ourselves to do that is letting go of our negative thinking, not
Yeah.
feeling our thoughts, and not believing that everything we think is true, because it's not.
Absolutely. It's not. Um, I wanna end it here, but I mean, we've said so much that's redundant, but it's again, like the book is redundant, but it's just
Mhm.
so many powerful themes to instill. Close us out with just your last couple of pieces of advice, whether it's about why somebody should read this book, whether it's about like a personal experience, like what's something you want to end this with? Like, what is something you want
Absolutely.
people to know?
I think that if you are someone who is looking to be unaffected by your negative thoughts, this book is for you. If you are someone who finds yourself ruminating, constantly thinking about something over and over and over again in your head, and you can't seem to let it go, this book is for you. Like, truly, we are in the driver's seat. We have the power to change our experiences. We are one thought away from a whole new experience. If you just, the next time you feel yourself thinking negatively, becoming aware, bringing that consciousness to light of like, oh, I'm feeling my thinking right now. That's literally all that it takes, that acknowledgement and just letting those thoughts flow, knowing that you are not what you think. And some of us do struggle with intrusive thoughts, but it means nothing about you. And I can't say this enough that like the power is literally within ourselves. And I strongly believe that anybody who reads this book, whether it be for mental health reasonings, whether it be for someone who's just looking for motivation or clarity on like next steps in life, this book is for you.
I appreciate it. Look at, hey, look at us.
Look at that. Who would have thought?
For all of our viewers who don't know us personally, this kind of conversation is we have like these talks a lot. We have those moments where we'll be on the phone for 45 minutes, just like going down a rabbit hole of like our emotions and like what's going on in our life. But to put this out on a podcast, I don't know, it's just silly, but good for us. I love that we did this.
Good for us. I love it too.
Thanks so much, Allie. I appreciate it. I'm going to leave you with another book recommendation. I just picked it up and I'm absolutely in love right now. This actually, I had just picked this up a few days ago and it kind of like kicked my ass back into gear. Like, as you know, I've been struggling to just like get up and get motivated. I had since like wiped off this whiteboard with all my old stuff. I can put a completely new like framework for what I'm about to do right now. And it just got me off my ass. Like, I think depression and anxiety, it's one thing. I can't speak to mental health. Like I can't speak to depression. I can't speak to medication in any means, but I went through a funk and this book just got me out of my funk. And so I just want to recommend it. It seems like it's up your alley. It's called The Second Mountain by David Brooks. I'm only like about 50 pages in, but it was just the motivation that I needed. And it's kind of an extension of this book in some ways too. So I feel like you'd like it.
Ooh, I like that. Maybe that can be our next podcast discussion.
This one. Love it. Well, thank you so much, Allie, for joining me. It's funny ending a conversation with like one of your closest friends, but I really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for being so open to like reading this when I told you how excited I was by it. And I'm really happy that it kind of had the same experience on you.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's a good idea.
All right. Talk to you later.